Back live with you tonight here on In Focus, and thanks for staying on. President Cyril Ramaphosa will tomorrow evening around this time deliver his most anticipated, shall I say, State of the Nation address. Business, residents, civil society organizations want the president to decisively address the energy crisis, high levels of crime and unemployment, and make commitments on basic income grants. Joining us now on this particular matter to dissect a little bit more what the president needs to focus on, Isobel Frye, Executive Director of Social Policy Initiative, as well as Fedusa's General Secretary, Riefdah Ajam. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time and coming in tonight. A cry that we are hearing, Isobel, is a cry for a radical New Deal. I mean, if you listen to the cry of the excluded, they will tell you that there needs to be something immensely radical that would need to be announced by the president for us to even begin to make our way out of this. It's not longer looming, but it's really an economic crisis. If we are losing 1 billion rands a day because of load shedding, we are in an economic crisis of humongous proportion. Do you think they are aware of the immense suffering that the people of this country are currently living under because of this economic hardship?
Good evening, Thabo. And that's a really well-phrased question, because you can understand this, you can hear the statistics, but you use the word suffering, the hardship. And it cannot be that a leadership that cares about its people can know the extent of the suffering. I mean, as the statistics are rolling in, we can see the impact on unemployment, we can see the impact on starvation, hunger. In a column that I wrote today, I mean, schools are not receiving school fees. Every aspect of society that binds us together is unraveling. And at the heart of it is the question of what people are meant to cling to hope to. Now, we were talking off camera about the energy crisis and how it affects us. Now, the majority of people usually don't have electricity. They usually don't have water. Instead, the battle is for daily survival. That is the message that we're hoping that leadership gets. I mean, this is the last State of the Nation for the full year for the president before the elections early next year. It needs to be a year in which change happens, in which, as you said, the extent of the change has to be sufficient to change the lives, to touch the lives of every single person. And that has to happen this year, because from next year onwards, we're going to have elections and probably coalition crisis. I mean, we've seen what's happened to the cities of Joburg, Upulileni and Tshwane. We cannot keep a mayor for more than a week, let alone pass anything. We need to anticipate what's going to happen and make sure that not only do people have bread on the table, but the economy is ticking over, because there are issues put in place in order to do that. And
what is that figure sitting at now? I think after COVID, we were talking 14 million people who go to bed hungry.
Yeah, we're looking at about 57% of the population and a growing number of people in starvation. So the last official statistics are 25%. 1 in 4 South Africans, if you look around any room that you're in, 1 in every 4 people standing in that room statistically is hungry. And we know that hunger affects children, and it affects the whole generation because it's cognitive development as well as physical development. So kids who are not performing at school, often it's hunger. And they get punished, they get pushed out of school, and so the disruptive cycle continues. And it really is an intergenerational poverty rather than some kind of illness or naughtiness on behalf of that child. That's the burden that rests on our shoulders as a society, and that's the one that we need to turn around. And we can. That's the issue. We've just seen footage of the incredible disaster in Turkey and Syria. That's something which comes out of nowhere. This has been growing in our society. This we've known year upon year upon year. The cries have been made from Cry the Excluded, from hashtag Pay the Grants, from many other social movements. And the ears of the leadership have been deaf. Possibly, if we could say cynically, as we get towards the election, maybe that's what will make leadership listen. That's
what they say. One thing that scares politicians is the possibility of losing power. But we'll come to that in just a moment. Riefdah, let's bring you in here. Listening to that, over 15 million people possibly going to bed hungry in this country. There's a debate that goes on. Economists and activists and labor like yourself would say, well, it's either vast sums of money needs to be given to banks so that banks can give people loans and small businesses can start and so on and so forth? Or, as is the case now, give more latitude to mining houses to generate their own power, probably make more money out of it, or sign more IPPs, or give more money to oil companies and buy diesel to keep the lights on? Others are saying spend vast sums of money on meeting the needs of the people and creating jobs. Who should be getting vast sums of money?
Well, let's contextualize the question. The need is absolutely everywhere right now. And as we anticipate the Sona, everybody goes in not just despondent, but totally in despair. The vast sums of money we should be looking at should be geared towards investment, and investment in order to grow the economy with the reality of trying to create jobs. I'm just listening to the discussion that Isobel has raised now, and we are literally capturing our own children. They are not able to get to schools. The longer you keep a child out of school, the less likely a child is able to return back to their society. We simply don't want to raise a generation of delinquents. That is the kind of despair that we are at right now. And when we take a look at workers right now, the key constituency that I am representing and coming from on behalf of Fedusa and millions of other workers out there, the current unemployment rate as we speak now, not even mentioning the expanded definition, sitting at 43%. We talk about electricity, and we are waiting for the president to make a pronouncement on a state of disaster in order to ease up procurement regulations, to be able to give not only businesses an injection of hope in order to get back onto their feet, but in order for organized labor and for workers overall to continue to retain some sense of security of employment. We take a look at NERSA and the ridiculous state of wanting to bring about a triple inflation jump increase. How does that make sense in light of the fact that recent wage negotiations that have been concluded only make provision for less than inflation? So how do we even begin to survive when job insecurity remains a stark reality for us? How do we even face our members at the end of the day, knowing full well that any form of security is being eroded in terms of these increases, not only in electricity, but also the spate of interest rate increases that have gone on now. So there's no disposable income. The cyclical economic activity that needs to be fostered is simply not there. So where is the hope? Where is the sense of emergency and urgency that we need right now to be able to drive a number of issues? We're speaking about ESCOM, but there's a basket of issues that workers are looking towards at this stage to be able to drive many other elements. So I'll pause there because the conversation is just too lengthy at this stage in terms of what we would like to see as Fedusa, in terms of what the president should be making clear pronouncements on. And yes, as we drive these matters forward, we are looking for decisiveness from the president. We cannot continue in the current trajectory that we are.
The needs are so vast, Isobel, and that's precisely what the challenge is, isn't it? So you have a sector of society that says we need a just transition, and they will push very hard for that, because not only do we need to take care of the needs of the people, we also need to save the planet. You've got a group of people that say we want government to hire more people directly, give them 3 million jobs, change the policies and pay for those people. You have others that are saying, no, build decent housing. We have a story now where people are saying, right in the vicinity of City Hall, there are street dwellers who are saying, President, prioritize the question of building decent housing. Others will say we need clean water, sanitation, and so on and so forth, decent health services. The list is vast. What can the president do? Can he do anything on all that? Or is there something that he can pick immediately and that would make a big difference?
You might have been setting me up there to say big, But I think we all acknowledge that there is no silver bullet, Thabo, and that's the issue. As we've been discussing, then we've had the opportunity to do the right thing, and we've avoided doing that. But I did want to say that one of the critical ways of finding a solution is to look at South Africa, really, the national question, as a balance sheet. So you've got a certain amount of wealth, and you've got certain allocations that have come from that are made up of that wealth. And we have to be asking, if things are not happening right, are those allocations being done correctly? I was looking at some research this morning of a similar question in the UK. Poverty in the UK has risen dramatically. Cost of living increases and energy increases similar to ours. So we're not the only country in the world facing this dilemma. But other countries are being a lot more bold about the interventions that are required. Now, a number of economists like Duma Kabule and others have been saying for a number of years that macroeconomic framework needs to be looked at, that the actual amount of money that we're saying is available is not sufficient for our needs. And my argument that I've been making in recent days is, in a way, we are distributing, but we're not raising enough. Now, if you look at the traditional social democracy, government distributes, but it also raises taxes. We've cut income taxes. We've cut corporate taxes dramatically since 1994. The one tax that we've increased is value-added tax, which comes from the pockets of the poorest because it's a flat rate. So you and I pay the same amount as someone who buys a loaf of bread, and that's the only thing they can afford. We need to be looking at the wealth taxes. We know that South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. We know that wealth generates a greater return than your or my salary. So those who are sitting on an asset are getting far greater returns on that in terms of income than those who are fortunate enough to have a job. So there is no way that this is going to miraculously right itself. The market is not going to make it better. The state needs to get bold, and it needs to start disciplining capital by saying, this is where we're taxing the wealth, and this is where it's going. Now, we saw today that Frye from Sibanye was saying that capital is not investing, that capital is on an investment strike because of the levels of what perceived corruption, inability to give energy, etc., etc. So yes, there are conditions that come with that.
Right.
But those too lie in the hands of government. So for government to say it's beyond our control is really not what we voted them in for.
Right, back live with you tonight here on In Focus. Still with us, Social Policy Initiative Executive Director Isobel Frye and Fedusa's General Secretary Riefdah Ajam. And we are talking, of course, looking ahead to the State of the Nation address. And as we're talking now during the break, and it's exactly what I wanted to raise with you, there are others who are saying we should actually be changing our whole entire economic policy, move away from minerals, energy, and finance-driven economy that is focused on exports and actually focus, for example, on manufacturing, build steel that we need for our houses, hire more people, and use that steel here at home instead of taking it out there.
Absolutely. And, I mean, for decades, we've had an export orientation to our production. And that necessitated us opening our tariffs. And so we saw a huge increase of cheaply priced goods, which destroyed the garment workers sector and different parts of our economy. The point is it would need to be done in such a way that addresses those very infrastructure requirements that we have. Now, if we're looking at just transitions and the billions that we're hoping to procure for that, why is it that we're looking to import all of those inputs that go into that? If we had a plan that looked and said for the next 20 years, this is what we're going to be doing in terms of our energy transition, these are the inputs that we need. Let's start manufacturing them and tie them into the conditions for the international loans and the grants that we're getting with the just transitions. That's a perfect example of how we can use the multiplier from the investment to not only have the transition which is required, but to create jobs and to create communities again, and to ensure that people have the hope that Riefdah was saying just doesn't exist at a community level. To be told that another policy is going to happen means nothing. If you can see that there are going to be jobs that are manufactured that make sense to you, that are also the outputs of those are going to be building the areas in which you live, that's a kind of vibrant vision of a society that we hope the President speaks about tomorrow, not some long-term gain based on short-term pain.
Yeah.
We need to see that vision.
Riefdah, I saw you nodding your head on 2 points. One is tax the wealthy a little bit more, but two, move from the focus on export, but actually building a different kind of economy in the country that is probably built on industrialization.
Let me zoom in on the second point first and foremostly. We need to be more of an export processing economy. We have seen the benefits during lockdown, and we have seen the ill-fated decisions that have been taken by South African government, and we have literally exposed the shortcomings. During the time of the pandemic, at the height of the pandemic, we saw that South Africa was importing an alarming rate of 92% of their PPEs. Now, that is an absolute insult not only to workers in the manufacturing sector, but workers in the very sector that Isobel has alluded to earlier on in the clothing, textile, manufacturing sector. We have the capacity here to be able to focus on those capacities that we are able to advance and ensure that it is a more export-focused approach. In this instance, we have been pushing the sectoral master plans that focuses on a localization agenda. But when are we going to start seeing the fruits of those agendas when government itself is procuring from the outside borders of the country? We need to be able to be 120% proudly South African in order for us to realize this particular point. Now, a different economic mindset, absolutely, but we have to realize that even before we entered this pandemic, we were standing at an unemployment rate of approximately 29.1%. When do we get this right? When do we look at infrastructural development that will unlock the ability of South Africa to utilize the capacity and the geographical position that it commands right now to be able to say that rail, roads and ports in particular are going to be the bullets that we need, albeit the low-hanging fruits right now, to get us out of the scenario that we are in. Equally so, we speak about the just transition. Now, I ask both of you with tears in my eyes, how can the transition ever be just if already as a result of the pandemic, we had shed in excess of 600,000 jobs? For this energy mix, for the transition in any way to be just and for nobody to be left behind, for every new job or for every job that has been lost, a new job must be created. As Fedusa, we are part of the Presidential Climate Change Commission, and we have pushed the agenda for a just transition center to be centralized in Johannesburg, the hub of South Africa. We need to be able to look at how we have this ability to secure funds to be able to make sure that we can meet the demands of the future. But this is going to hinge on an ability to upskill, to reskill, and to make sure that that agenda of not only the fourth industrial revolution and the green energy, which are the two legs that Fedusa believe are the driving forces behind this revolution, must be implemented and actioned with absolute determination and conviction. And employers need to be able to understand that they have to invest in the human capital and the capacity that we have right now for us to be competitive. There are many elements that we can look at when we speak about the economy, and equally so the export potential. We simply are importing too much right now, and we are not able to unleash the cyclical economic activity to give a boost and an injection to those that need it the most.
Riefdah, what is the one thing that President can say in his position that could be able to unlock that particular aspect which you raise?
You know, there are so many factors right now. We are running to meet targets. We are running to meet international ambitions when we know full well that we have not been contributors of this climate change that we see being unleashed now more horrifically than ever before in this country. We need to commit dedicated funds to have this Just Transition Centre enabled. We need to make sure that we bring everybody on board for this transition to be just. And we need to understand that chasing the figures of those who have been the main culprits and contributors towards climate emissions and towards those greenhouse gases, they need to equally be able to commit. But we are in a very good situation as South Africa because we are already engaging the conversation and the tough discussions. So the President needs to be able to implement the aspect of a Just Transition Centre in South Africa to move the targets forward. And there are numerous other aspects, but we need to be able to look at the alternate energy sources. Yeah. We cannot continue to be stuck in a coal revolution that we know is hampering our abilities as South Africans to be able to move forward. Yeah. We simply cannot continue to invest and reinvest in coal-fired power stations. Yeah. The stark realities in our face right now, we have heard it from so many commentators, and equally so coming from directly the Eskom CEO through various presentations that have been made. Yeah. So unless we are willing to look at those alternates and look at renewable energy sources and engage the conversation rigorously, but with the intent of protecting South Africa, we're going to remain stuck in the rut where we are right now. We do not have the luxury to wait for 2 years.
Yeah, interesting that you raised that. I'm sure NUMSA, wherever they're sitting watching you now, they're shaking their head very strongly, not in agreement with what you've just said. But because of time, we won't engage in a lot in that for now. But let's bring you in here, Isobel, and talk about particularly the theme that we will hear. I'm sure it's the theme that we heard the last time, leaving no one behind. It's probably what the President will want to go and try and revisit that particular statement. And if it was to be true, what would you want him to announce on the basic income grant?
So again, building on from where Riefdah left off, one of the critical factors is the fact that we're looking at a massive food shortage coming up over the next 2 years. I mean, we've had the levels of starvation we were talking about, but the producers of food are saying we just can't. We had an unexpectedly large dependency on imported grains from Ukraine, as well as Russia. We're not producing for the next 2 years because of the Eskom shortage. So the basic income grant is the one aspect that can ensure that everybody gets enough to put on their bread and butter on the table. You were mentioning about the question about the 350. We really take to task the fact that 350 is not enough. 350 is less than half the food poverty line. It's less than half than it takes to feed someone for a month. Now, for that to be paid out and people to be told that that's sufficient, they must go away. It's not only short-sighted in terms of human rights. It's not only short-sighted in terms of the Constitution, but from an economic perspective, it's completely short-sighted because it means that Thabo and Isobel will not have enough money to buy the food that Riefdah started to produce in her backyard because we've anticipated what's going to happen. So all those schemes that the small people in their everyday communities are doing in order to sustain themselves and their communities and their neighborhoods are being depleted because they don't have enough cash to go around. Right. Now we've seen, and we've spoken about this in the past, how large supermarkets are sucking out that grant money into the profits for their shareholders, many of whom don't even live in this country. Yeah, yeah. How is it that we can invert that and say we flood that money into communities through a dedicated, and I mean, let's use our own measures. We have an upper bound poverty level of 1,500 rand. Yeah. Let's use that and say that's the amount that goes to everybody. We are then able to sustain these activities that are happening, to sustain that kind of the production and manufacturing that we need, because while we wait for the big jobs to come, we are going to lose more and more. We need to. That's what the President needs to say tomorrow. He needs to say, we empower everybody. We use the democracy dividend and we say, in your hands is the ability to turn around this country. That's what I want to hear.
I appreciate you both. Thank you very much for coming on. Unfortunately, we are completely out of time tonight. As always, time, the enemy there. Social Policy Initiative Executive Director Isobel Frye and Fedusa's General Secretary Riefdah Ajam.